Hello there. Welcome to another edition of the Inrus Files. Thoughts on culture, history, and the human condition from a very specific Generation X point of view. Today, I want to talk to you about labels and how powerful they can be, and also how they can miss the mark. Generation X and the generation before us. My parents straddle the line between baby boomers and what some people call the greatest generation, um, which I think is a misnomer. There's got to be another name for that generation, but essentially the next generation older than the baby boomers. They straddle that line, but something that generation or those generations, that general age group has in common in general in United States culture is a general distrust of psychiatry and psychology. And as I was growing up, the the industry of psychiatry and psychology had started to identify patterns of behavior that they called attention deficit disorder. And then eventually they renamed it to attention hyperactivity. Uh, I don't know, ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And the more they got to know about it, the more there really did seem to be something there. It has to do with problems with the receptors in the brain taking up the dopamine that should be released, or problems with the brain actually releasing dopamine under the circumstances that a more neurotypical brain might do, which means that the individual in question ends up seeking novelty in order to get that dopamine diet fulfilled, or they end up fixating on something in order to get the dopamine craving resolved. We all need dopamine. It's part of the reward system in our brain that uh, helps us to do the things we should be doing and to avoid the things we should be avoiding. So, and hello, by the way. So we started labeling people as having ADD and then later on ADHD as we started to understand the situation a little better. And at the beginning, there were medications that were intended to help with the dopamine reuptake or the dopamine release mechanisms. And this had varying amounts of success with the patients. Over time, we got better at it. The medical industry got better at it. But there's this sense among the baby boomers and older generations that, well, everybody has problems with focus. Everybody has problems with attention from time to time. You just have to get over it and do what needs to be done. But uh, but if you can actually identify what the root cause is of a certain behavior, even if you're not necessarily able to successfully alter that behavior, you at least can have an understanding of why that behavior happens and even mitigate it by changing the environment, eliminating distractions or otherwise modifying the requirements of a given task, performing that task at a different time of day depending upon the state of mind of the person who's in it. It's kind of like, I think we can all acknowledge at this point, some people are morning people and some people are night owls. And night owls can get up early in the morning if need be. They don't like it, but if need be, they will. But you're not going to get their best work out of them if their brain functions better later in the day. And likewise, a morning person uh, doesn't mind getting up early in the morning at all, really hates being kept up late. You're not going to get the best work out of a morning person late at night. Sometimes situations require that you do so anyway. But if you know that this is your strength or your not strength, we'll call it a weakness. You call it whatever you will. If we know that this is the tendency for an individual, putting a label on it can actually help, because then it allows you to acknowledge the situation for what it is, accept it for what it is, and also leverage it to get the best you possibly can out of the situation and out of what the person is capable of. I bring up the stress between the generations because it's something that has been on my mind. Members of my family have been diagnosed with ADHD, and there was a conversation between my sibling, one of my siblings, and one of my parents, essentially saying, "Well, if we all had been born 20 or 30 years later, I have no doubt that I would have been appropriately medicated when I was younger, and could have avoided a lot of unpleasantness later on." And the parent in question became rather hot under the collar. "No, there is no way that you would have been medicated. That medication is not how you deal with this sort of thing," and on and on. Uh, Very entrenched in this idea of the way to deal with the way to deal with your problems is to just soldier on. Everybody has attention issues. Everybody has focus issues. You just have to get over it, which is a lot like my morning people friends who are like, "Well, just get up earlier, and that takes care of it." And as a night owl, telling me to just get up earlier in the morning is cute, but it doesn't really acknowledge certain realities. Why do I bring this up? Aside from the fact that I am watching family members occasionally kind of go at each other, it has certainly made my life a little bit easier being able to recognize it in other family members and accommodate it as a result. When you know that somebody can't eat a certain food, you don't serve that food to them, and then everybody's happier when you have your meal. Um, Sometimes these labels can be helpful. We are all aware of how sometimes labels can be hurtful. And sometimes people end up living down to the labels that you apply to them. If you keep calling somebody stupid or lazy, they may start to internalize that idea themselves. It has always bothered me when people I care about say that quiet talk, that self-talk out loud. "Well, I'm just clumsy," and it's like, uh, don't don't limit yourself with these labels. Labels, however, can actually be an absolute force for good. And this is the story I want to tell today. When I was in sixth grade, which in the United States, so that's roughly the age of 13 years old. I think in Europe, I can't remember if in Europe that would be considered seventh grade, but whatever. Um, but in the sixth grade here in the United States, I was failing math, right? So I'm in what's called elementary school here, and I was failing math. Not because I couldn't do it, it was because I didn't wanna, and I don't mean that like, "Oh, I don't wanna, so I'm not gonna do it." What I mean is, we would be taught a concept, and then you would do a few practice runs, and you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I got this." And then you would be given a worksheet that had this essentially the same problem 50 times, and you look at the sheer number 50 times, and uh there's just no way that I could work up the mental energy to go through this obvious exercise in futility 50 times because I already got it. But then, because I would find myself paying attention to other things, doing other things, there were so many better things to do than go through and do 50 exercises over and over and over again of something that you already understood. So, like, for example, drawing on your paper or passing notes to your classmates. Much more important things to do than the same silly math problem over and over and over again. However, what that means is I ended up not getting these math sheets done, and we were given time during class to get them done, and I just wasn't getting them done. And then I would feel bad about it, but that that was just it was just the nature of things. I couldn't motivate myself to do something that was just so mind-numbingly boring and dumb. But by not turning in the homework and my grades starting to suffer, I started to also self-identify as being not good at math, not connecting the dots, not realizing that that wasn't the problem. Being bored was the problem, not being incapable of actually understanding it. That wasn't the problem. But I wasn't making those connections. Unbeknownst to me, while I'm going through this little crisis of confidence, um, there was a program that was starting up in the county where I lived, where the local major university wanted to identify 35 children who were highly capable in mathematics. And then they were going to take these children, and then as a kind of a quasi experiment, they were going to teach them an accelerated math program. In fact, their plans were really ambitious. Their idea was they were going to go through the entire curriculum from seventh grade to the end of high school. So that would be 6 years worth of or not elementary school, secondary school math. By the way, I can be good at math and not be good at arithmetic. Do understand that there's a difference. Anyway, so uh, uh, their intention was to squeeze 6 years of mathematics into one. And then when we were entering our eighth grade, the idea is that we would start taking college level math. So I didn't know that I had been identified as somebody who was eligible for this program. What they were doing is they were looking at the standardized test results of sixth graders who had essentially aced the math portion. And they were also only going to look at them if they were also doing really, really well on the language arts portion. So essentially, they wanted the absolute top 1% of math. And then for language arts, you had to score within at least the top 2% before they would even look at you as a candidate for this program, because it was going to be an aggressive program. Then the next step was, so they did this and they found a couple of hundred kids, a few hundred kids that fit this criteria. And then they reached out to the schools to let them know that these students were being considered. And then the parents had to be notified. All of this is happening while the students themselves have no clue that this is going on. And then the people who are running the program are meeting with the parents. Well, a lot of parents choose not to have their children participate in this sort of a program, and there can be any number of reasons. It's inconvenient to have to take your kid out of school and drive them to the university 2 nights a week, and it's 2 nights a week, and so those are 2 evenings where dinners have to be modified, and everybody's schedule is thrown into a tizzy. The students themselves aren't necessarily able to drive themselves to the university until they are substantially older. So for the first several years of this kind of program, it's going to be inconvenient for the families. Some of the parents didn't want their children to participate because they were afraid of the stigma that would be attached of their kids not taking math with their classmates at school because they'd be taking it at the university instead, and that would make them outcast, that outsiders. It would make them other or different, which is a uh, which is a very difficult uh, thing. A lot of people are very concerned about conformity, and they were concerned about how their children would react if they were not conforming. Um, so it's it's funny how things go. Uh, there were still a lot of parents who were interested in having their children participate in the program. And then there were some teachers who weren't too excited about it. However, the people who were running this program, one of their big focuses was to get over the objections of the public schools, because those teachers were considered to be part of why highly capable math students were not necessarily performing as well as they could, because they were trying to teach a very specific method while the students learned better if they had been taught a different method. And so there was a lot of institutional pushback because, of course, if you're working as a teacher and you've been spending years teaching this way, come to believe this is the way to teach. That's a generalization, and there were a lot of teachers who embraced this idea of maybe teaching these kids at a more accelerated rate was the right way to go. This was the pilot year for this program, and so there hadn't been any results yet in our county to say, look at how successful this has been, or gee, look at all of the difficulties we've had. We need to change course. I think my parents may have been a little surprised, and also at the same time may not have been that surprised when they found out that I was being considered for this program. My mom was very good at math, but she went to college for a year or so and then didn't graduate. She got what was jokingly referred to by her generation as an MRS degree. Uh, my father didn't finish high school. He found high school to be boring. And so when faced with the prospect of having to continue with high school and just be absolutely bored out of his mind, or go do something interesting like maybe join the Air Force and learn how to fly, he decided he'd rather learn how to fly. Interesting side note. And I may have mentioned this in one of my other stories. He did end up joining the Air Force, and perfect vision, absolute aptitude for being a pilot. And they said, "We know exactly what we want you to do. We're going to put you in a completely different department of the Air Force." He ended up working in Intel, I guess, for a few years. Another story for another time, but all by way of saying, it wouldn't surprise me that, uh, if it was also the case that my father was having similar challenges. He was so good at the things he was required to do that he was so bored by it that he couldn't conceive of the idea of finishing high school. Um, so it's fascinating how things roll. Because I think my parents did see that I was not doing as well in math as I could have been, and maybe this was the reason why. What they did then was they took all of the kids whose parents were on board and whose school districts were on board, and then they told the kids. And then if the kids were interested, then the kids were gonna have to take a series of tests. In the United States, they're called SATs, or standardized aptitude tests. These are the exams that you take in order to determine, um, how well you are likely to do in college, and they were giving these tests to us at the age of 12. And then they were gonna look at the results of those standardized tests, and I think they were doing that partially because we had aced the tests that they gave us in grade school, but they wanted to see how giving us a more rigorous test would actually play out. Um, and I think there may have also been something that some portions of IQ tests and all that. And the net result was then after that boiled down the group, to make it even smaller, then they had interviews with the students. They needed students, they only wanted to admit students into the program who were relatively mature for that age group. You're not gonna expect 12-year-olds to be particularly mature, but but you don't want to invite behavioral problems into this program. Luckily for me, I did not exhibit any obvious behavioral problems, so go me. Uh, in the end, they admitted 35 students into this pilot program. And of the 35 students, um, I will note that 25 of us were male and 10 were female. And I learned a lot during the next 6 years that I participated in this program. I learned a lot about pedagogy. That um, I learned that, for example, boys are taught differently from girls. That when they're much younger, girls actually tend to do better in school than boys. And this is because uh, the uh, the girls are at a younger age a little calmer, and they sit and they pay attention and they do the work while the boys are being a little more rambunctious. Then, as they get older and the boys start settling down and paying attention and start doing the work, the teachers tend to start paying more attention to the boys, and then they start doing better. And because they start doing better, they start getting favored in terms of the attention of the teachers. By the way, everything I am saying right now is the way things were in the 1980s, uh, or very late 1970s. This is no longer true today. They changed how teaching works in the public schools in the United States since then, such that girls do much better in math and science, but in all of the subjects, they do much better in the public schools than boys do. All like it's it's a statistical thing, and it's because they changed the focus, they acknowledged that girls are actually good students, which is great, but they overcorrected as well when you look at the percentage difference between how well boys did over girls because of the way they used to teach and how well girls do over the boys because of the way they currently teach. You discover that boys are getting completely sidelined in far greater numbers and a far greater rate than girls had been before. That's why I refer to it as an overcorrection. I don't remember the statistics right off the top of my head, but I can look them up and post them if anybody doubts me. Um, and by the way, I mean, having gone through the program when I did, I thought it was an injustice, and I thought that something did need to be done to change uh, how we were teaching so that we were meeting the students where they were. I still feel that way. It's just that now we also have to acknowledge that boys and girls sometimes learn differently or they advance at different rates at different ages. And if you can account for that, you can make sure that everybody lives up to their fullest potential. Having said all of that, um, the I had never I here's how I remember grade school. I remember uh, the I remember being kind of like an A minus student. I would get A's. I would get B's. I was okay. And if I read, it was because I mean, even even when I was in 5th grade, I was a chatty kid, and I tended to love chatting, with other chatty kids, and, and I tended to biology being what it is, I tended to be particularly interested in participating in conversations with the girls, and the girls were all reading books. By the way, this is also a statistical trend in the English speaking world. Women buy more books than men. This has been true for as long as they've been keeping track of been keeping track of these things. Women read more than men as a general rule. And this is just as true in grade school as it is at other age ranges. But the girls were reading, and then the girls were talking about what they were reading. So if I wanted to participate in the conversations, I was going to have to read. So I read. Um, but yeah, when it came to math, I wasn't doing as well, and it wasn't, and I didn't, I don't know. I just had kind of weird feelings about that. So now all of a sudden I'm identified as at the time they used the term gifted and talented, and that's one of those terms now that kind of makes me cringe. Um, I kind of like the current term of saying highly capable because the thing is, we all have our strengths. It just so happened that one of my strengths at that particular stage of my development happened to be mathematical concepts. As I mentioned earlier, uh, just during this chat, I wasn't so good at arithmetic, but there's a difference between math and arithmetic. Arithmetic is just a part of the puzzle. So I could do the arithmetic on the paper, but I was counting dots when I was adding and subtracting. I was doing dots with my pencil to figure it out. I wasn't memorizing it. I wasn't using number systems with my fingers or any of the other systems that a lot of kids have used so that as adults they're still doing arithmetic in their head, which is fantastic. I still have to kind of sort it out. But there are a lot of concepts in math that build on top of each other, and because I understood the concepts right away, um, that meant it was easier for me to learn geometry, trigonometry, um, and then probability, predicate calculus, symbolic logic, um, all this stuff. Loved it. I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I ate it up. This program at the university was being run by somebody who was actually an amazing teacher. And because we were the first cohort going through the system, he was our teacher for 5 of those 6 years. One of those years, we had somebody else because they knew they needed to start getting other teachers in the program. By the time we were in our 4th year, there was us, and then there were the kids who were in their 3rd year, the kids who were in their 2nd year, the kids who were in their 1st year, and the kids being screened as 6th graders to be considered. The one professor and his small staff weren't enough to do all of the work. They eventually had to make the staff larger, and that included enlarging the teaching staff. Our teacher for calculus wasn't teaching the way I learn, and in fact, it turned out he wasn't teaching the way most of us learned in this program. We, as a general rule, did really, really poorly in calculus. Um, and it's interesting me. It's fascinating to me that my kids now who have gone through high school, and they now teach calculus at high school, which was something that I don't remember being a thing when I was going through high school. Um, they're doing just fine with calculus. They're managing to skate right through it. What I also find interesting, well, never mind. I was going to start talking about all these geeky math concepts. Why I'm able to handle differential equations like nobody's business, even though I was not able to master calculus, and yet other people apparently find they need to master calculus before they can master differential equations. Sorry, I'm getting way esoteric. I don't understand how my brain works. But when somebody said to me, "You are highly capable, you are gifted and talented at math," it changed my identity of myself. It was a label, but it was a label that then enabled me to better understand why some things worked out well and some things didn't work out so well. And the things that weren't working out so well could work out better if I just took a different approach. I'd mentioned earlier that one of my siblings had said to one of my parents that had we all been born 30 years later, um, that they absolutely would have been on medication for ADHD, and my parents saying, "No, no, no, that no child of mine was going to be medicated for anything." Uh, it turns out my sibling had an interesting uh, educational situation as well. Sh she did not do as well in school, and later found out it's because she processed numbers and dates very differently from the way most people do. She Reading for her was a different experience from most of the rest of us in that, uh, most of us, we read and then we recognize the words, we process them through our eyeballs into our brain, we come up with, "This is what these words represent," and we go on our merry way. Her brain had to do a little bit of extra work because of how her brain processed what her eyeballs saw. And it's not that reading was painful for her, but it just wasn't pleasant. And you can't just make things better by saying, "Well, try harder." Well, just sit down and read anyway. And, it didn't work. So she hated reading. And that's unfortunate. Later on, she discovered that actually audiobooks are amazing. And she suddenly had a completely different relationship with literature and nonfiction and all that. She was just gobbling up all of the information she could because processing through her ears was working fantastic. I know it's fantastically, but never mind. Anyway, all by way of saying labels are important and labels can help, even if the labels are considered to be potentially not positive. Again, let's take the ADHD example. Uh, when you have the word disorder in a label, it sounds bad. I had somebody explain to me in psychology, the word disorder is simply used to mean that this condition, this situation is interfering with the ease with which you can do something that you otherwise would expect to be able to do without much difficulty. So I'm throwing a lot of words in there. A shorter way of describing it is if it's keeping you from doing the things that you think you should be capable of doing, we will call it a disorder. That's what the word means. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means that this particular arrangement is thwarting you from more easily accomplishing something that you should otherwise be able to accomplish. And so maybe medication can help. Maybe a different environment can help. Maybe a different approach to the problems can help. All of these things are possible. And knowing that now, knowing that with regard to family members who have their own specialties, and knowing that with regard to myself and my specialties, recognizing that I actually do have a capacity to do pretty well with mathematics, with logic, and I also have, we all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses, but sometimes you will hear people refer to ADHD as a superpower. Well, it can be if you approach it in a way that allows you to leverage the parts that allow you to focus uh, uh, more effectively than somebody who isn't able to do that laser focus or isn't as inclined to do that laser focus, might be a better way of putting it. I realize I'm speaking in very careful terms here because I am not an advocate for going around and labeling people. At the same time, what I am saying is that I think we need to let go of this idea that labels are always bad. Labels can actually help us if we use them as a diagnostic tool to help get us where we want to go. Um, because I was identified as somebody who was capable in math, I came to embrace the idea that I was capable in math. And because I was able to embrace the idea that I was capable in math, I started to consider the idea that just because something was difficult for me for one reason or another didn't mean necessarily that I was bad at it. And so then I kind of applied that thinking to other things as well. Maybe I will be good at public speaking. Maybe I will be good at storytelling. Uh, Once you realize that something that you thought you were bad at, you actually can be good at as long as you approach it the right way, worlds of possibilities open up for you. I don't I don't have any there's no particular societal ill right now that I am able to say, if we would just learn to label people better, we could make all of society's woes go away. Rather, what I am saying is when you see somebody struggling, and you do, it might be a family member, it might be a coworker, It could be a neighbor, whatever they're struggling with, whatever the reason for them to be struggling, consider, is it possible that what they are struggling with is the result of an approach, and that if you were to modify the approach, you might actually get different results. It's the, man, this guy is always late in the mornings and he's always groggy when he shows up, and he's just not, he doesn't seem to really be with it until, until the afternoon, and then he's fine. And maybe he's just not a morning person. This is a case where if you can acknowledge that this is a tendency, and we can give that tendency a name or a label, he's a night owl, maybe you'll get more work out of him if you have him working evenings. And when I say working, that can be in any capacity. When I am writing, I write in the evenings. Writing in the mornings typically does not work for me. I've been a morning person. When I was teaching 8th grade math, I did have to get up early every morning, and I somehow figured out how to be a morning person for a little while. But yeah, I write in the evenings, and if I don't have to get up in the mornings, I won't. In the chat, I see I see a comment about how somebody's son tends not to get up before noon. I was that guy. I was absolutely that kid, and my father could never understand how on the weekends I could sleep that late, and it's because I did all my creative work at night. I did all my homework late at night. Doing it earlier in the day wasn't gonna happen, but if you're burning the midnight oil, your body at some point has to make up for it, and that means you're gonna sleep in. And if, you don't have to get up early on the weekends, that's when you're gonna sleep in. So, yeah, just throwing that out there. It's, food for thought. Somebody's struggling, maybe give some thought as to why that might be, a and look at it from a generous point of view. Don't look at it as, why are they lazy or why are they incompetent? Look at it as what, uh what is different about how they learn or how they perform that could be improved if they were to just approach it differently. I have seen it happen, and I have actually participated in making it happen with people around me, uh, identifying situations where if you just approach it differently, you can get a better result because it is how they are wired. It is how we're all wired. We're all wired differently. At some point, I think I'm going to want to talk about some ideas around evolutionary biology and why it is that in any group of people you are going to have some morning people and some night owls. It's just inevitable. You're going to have some people who are intuitive, and you're going to have some people who are logical. You are going to have leaders, and you're going to have followers. You need all of them for the tribe to survive. Uh, those are my thoughts for today. I hope I hope I've given you something to think about, and I hope I've given you something actionable. Look around you, see if there's anything you can do to help somebody or yourself just by taking a different approach, by recognizing that trends might actually represent an actual predisposition, and maybe there's another way to leverage that predisposition. Thank you very much for checking in on the Inrus Files, and we'll see you again next time. Have a good one. Cheers.